It's the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel, and the NFL season kicks off next week. So we're taking you through some bold takes to get you hyped for the season. So join us live on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. I'm Ben Wosley. Welcome to the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. Today we're talking bold takes, and there's no one bolder than my man Jeff Kazar. Jeff, it's just us today because Bobby is on the IR list for today. I hope you've got some extra boldness for today's show.
Oh, extra spicy. Hopefully the viewers like these takes.
Look, I think it's going to be exciting. Look, we've got to cover up for Bobby's boldness. Bobby is sadly not with us, but look, I've brought some extra boldness. It's right behind me. I've just hidden it back there, and I'm ready to go. And your first take, look, it's not the boldest to start with. We've kind of got a boldness level that kind of works like a spice level. We're going to start with mild, then we're going to heat it up, and then right at the end, we're going to go super spicy and really hit you with it when you're least expecting it. So your first take is all about running backs, and you've got Josh Jacobs a little bit higher than someone that most people have in the top 10. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I currently I prefer Josh Jacobs over Devon Achane. Kind of all preseason, I've kind of been not as high on Achane. I just know that he just had an incredibly efficient season last year. But looking into his role this year in the preseason, he wasn't getting as many as the first team snaps and carries. I think Mostert is still going to be the primary ball carrier for them. There was rumors that he is going to be more like a pass catcher. So is he going to run less? Like, I still don't know what kind of the usage is. I know he averaged almost 12 touches last season. So if he gets any more, someone else is going to lose it. I then look at what Miami did in the offseason. They traded up in the third round to get rookie Jalen Wright, who has true elite athleticism. And I think you don't trade up for a running back not to use him year one, like they used Achane last year in year one of his season. So I think he's going to be a thorn in that running back by committee. Currently, Achane is at 24 on ADP. Jacobs is at 37. But why I like Jacobs more is that last year, you would say he's inefficient. He was on a bad team with the Raiders. They saw the most stacked boxes a season ago, but he now goes to Green Bay. And I don't think you can stack the box against Jordan Love and the three receivers since they spread it out evenly amongst everybody. So I think he's going to get more room to operate. And Matt LaFleur has a tradition of having great running backs, a la Aaron Jones, basically, as running back 2, 5, 12, and 9 from 19 through 22 season. So I think, honestly, Jacobs is joining the best offense he's been a part of, with the best quarterback he's played with, probably one of the better O-lines as well. And unfortunately, A.J. Dillon is out for the season. I know everybody was worried about the competition in Green Bay, but he's now gone. They did draft a rookie in Marshawn Lloyd, who I'm really excited about in Dynasty, but he's been dealing with injuries with a hip, hamstring, and some fumbles issues. He didn't make the PUP list, which is a good thing for his sake, but I don't know if he's going to play early on in the season. So I just feel like Jacobs is going to get so much volume and a great offense that he's just going to produce. You may not think he's the best running back, but he's going to produce in that team. And even if he doesn't get like the workhorse load that he got in with the Raiders, Aaron Jones only averaged like 15 to 17 touches in that span when he was one of the top 10 running backs. So if they scale him back slightly, he might be more efficient and have more pep to his step. So that's why I'm a little bit more higher on Jacobs, and I have him higher on my ranking as well due to this.
Look, I am totally on board with this take. I'm with you all the way on this. I think Devon Achane is very, very much overrated. There's no indication to suggest that he's suddenly gone past Raheem Mostert. I know that last season he was the running back 5 on a per game basis, but he had that ridiculous 50-point game in week 3, and that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting because realistically he only played 11 games. So if we dial that 50-point game back to a normal 20-point game, which is usually one of his high-scoring games, and that's still pretty good for a single game, suddenly he's the running back 18 on a per-game basis. So realistically, I think a lot of his production last season, firstly, it was pretty fluky. It was late in games when they had big leads. And secondly, it was a lot. Much of it was kind of condensed into a couple of games. You don't particularly want that in fantasy. I know certainly in a best ball league, I think Devon Achane becomes more interesting. But in a general league, in most situations, Raheem Mostert's going to do most of the work early on, and you really need the Dolphins to get a big lead or at least look like they're in control of the game before they hand the ball over to Etienne. And you'd have to think now that they've got this rookie involved in Jalen Wright, who you correctly said they like a lot. They traded up a future third-round pick to go and get him. All of a sudden, you've got a guy who's going to be taking touches, and they might want to give him those opportunities later on in the game to see what he's got. So there's a lot of reasons to be very, very, very nervous about Etienne. And it's not like a Raheem Mostert injury suddenly means that Etienne takes over the lead role. If Mostert goes down, Jalen Wright is the Raheem Mostert replacement. He's a very similar style of player. He's a big but fast back. He's going to get the goal line carries if Mostert's out. Realistically, Etienne has a very specific role, and I don't think it's exactly right for fantasy. On the other hand, Josh Jacobs, as you said, takes over that Packers role where he's going to be super productive. They don't have A.J. Dillon. And yet, despite that, there's a lot of reports coming out and saying Marshawn Lloyd might not even be the number 2 running back at the moment because of all those injuries. He hasn't learned the offense yet. It's going to be very slow for him to start the year. Might even be Emmanuel Wilson we see as the second guy, and he's a solid receiving back. But realistically, Josh Jacobs is going to get so much volume early on, and there's going to be a lot of receiving volume there. So I absolutely agree with you. I've got Etienne 5 spots lower than Josh Jacobs in my rankings. I expect this one to happen. Now, my mild take is Keon Coleman as a top 30 wide receiver. And let me take you through this because a lot of people don't agree with this. I believe that ECR has him around wide receiver 50, but he is legitimately wide receiver 30 in my rankings. There's been a lot of question marks over the Bills receiving room throughout the preseason. It seems that Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel are actually battling for one role. They're both playing that like smaller slot role, and they might not even be on the field in 12 personnel. Mac Hollins has been the clear-cut starter on the outside, and I do think we see Shakir and Samuel cycle through that role a little bit as well. But it's not like there's a very clear-cut situation of 3 top guys where Shakir and Samuel are 2 of them. Hollins is involved enough to mean that Shakir and Samuel aren't the guys they see as the top starters. Dalton Kincaid's also in there, and he's battling Dawson Knox for snaps. But I think it's reasonable to think, based on preseason usage, we'll see both of them out there quite a lot as well. But there's one piece that hasn't been involved in any of that. He's going to be a consistent every down player in the mold of last season's Bills fantasy star, which was Stephon Diggs, and that's Keon Coleman. I think Coleman is going into that Diggs role. I think he's going to be their number 1 receiver, and it's not even close. I think he's going to get a solid amount of targets. He's going to be good in the red zone. He's going to get a lot of opportunities because realistically, I think it's probably he and Dalton Kincaid that are going to get most targets most weeks. So for me, he's being ranked way too low, and I expect him to finish somewhere in the top 30. Jeff, what are your thoughts on Keon Coleman?
Yeah, no, I definitely like Keon Coleman. He goes into a role with so many targets available with Josh Allen, and he's shown that he has the physical traits to be the number 1. And if he gets the targets, I don't see why he can't be a top 30 receiver. As I don't think anyone else on that roster is going to really compete for like the value targets that you want in a receiver 1. And I think he'll start getting those throughout the season. And as you get to the back end of the season, I think he's going to really pop off. Very similar to Rashid Rice last season in Kansas City. I could see a very similar trajectory for his first season as well. And with that, we saw what Rice did. He was definitely top 30. So this is bold, but like you said, it's mild. But I'm definitely on board.
Like it. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I do think he's going to build into the role especially, but I feel like even last season, Rice was really only getting 60 to 70% snaps early in the season. I think Coleman probably goes into an every down role straight away, or certainly within a couple of weeks, and that can only help that production as well. But yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. And let's stay with the Bills because Josh Allen is my number 1 quarterback. Please don't break my heart, Jeff.
Yeah, so might be my spiciest take here, and I don't do this with pleasure, but sometimes you just gotta look in some numbers, and I saw some things, and I'm like, wow, could this be the case? There's some numbers to maybe support it, but you gotta kind of dig deep. But this take is that Josh Allen will not be a top 5 quarterback by the end of the season. He's been quarterback 1 or 2 for the past, I think, 4 or 5 seasons, but I think this year there is a chance that he falls outside the top 5. Now, hear me out. in 2 seasons prior to Diggs being there, he was quarterback 19 his rookie season, and in his sophomore campaign, he was quarterback 11 on a per game basis. Well, he improved, right? But once Diggs came along, the offense totally changed. And interestingly, prior to Diggs, he never threw over 30 touchdowns in a season or 4,000 passing yards without a true like number one receiver. Not to just put it all on Diggs, but without a true number one, he didn't have the passing volume. And without a true number one, how efficient would the Bills' offense be? I look back at some numbers without Diggs with him. A lot of this was early in his career, though, but he was 15 and 13 without Diggs. 28 games without Stephon Diggs. He averaged only 184 passing yards with a 30 touchdowns to 21 interception ratio and only a 56 completion percentage. It's not very good. Yes, it's early in his career, though, but in 66 games with Stephon Diggs, he averaged almost 270 yards passing with 137 touchdowns to 57 interceptions, and his passing percentage increased to 63%, which is a significant jump in completion percentage. So if they're unable to sustain drives, we like Keon Coleman as being top 30, but what if he's just right at inside that top 30 and not a true number one like Diggs was, as being like a top 10 receiver and a guy you could target 10, 15 times a game? That makes the defense scheme to Diggs. And now without a true number one, do defenses handle the Bills' offense a little bit differently? I know a lot of his stats and fantasy is based on his rushing ability. His 15 scores last year were a true anomaly. He only averages 7 in his career. So I just worry that without a true number one early and middle of the season, can they sustain drives where he can still get the rushing upside and touchdowns? He's still going to have that floor, but what if he kind of regresses and he only throws for, say, 3,600 yards and like 28 touchdowns, which is not bad, but by his standards, that would be a down season. And just look back last year, Pat Mahomes didn't really have a true number one until Rice kind of emerged towards the end, but he finished as quarterback 8, which was outside the top 5. Everybody was kind of down on Mahomes last year because of his receiving core, but I feel like we don't have that same conversation about Josh Allen. And I'm wondering, why aren't we having that conversation?
I mean, I agree. I guess we are now, but yeah, I agree with you. Like you make a totally valid point. It's something we need to talk about more because Allen's going a good round ahead of Jalen Hurts and
Yeah,
Patrick Mahomes
early.
in a lot of and that seems very bold to me. Now, don't get me wrong; he is my number one quarterback, but I've got he, Hurts, and Mahomes really close to each other. The argument for me for having him number one is simply he has been a top 2 quarterback in each of the last 4 seasons, and his rushing floor is elite and it's consistent. But I can agree there is that reason for concern. He wasn't as accurate as a passer last season. He had 29 touchdowns and 18 interceptions, and it's been trending in that direction for a while. And he did have that unsustainable 15 rushing touchdowns you talked about. And I'd agree that rushing regression will probably happen. But if rushing regression happens, you'd have to think that passing touchdown regression compensates for that because I feel like they're not going to keep going to the running backs in the red zone. James Cook isn't exactly that guy. I do think they like using Josh Allen there. They might use Ray Davis. He's certainly a bigger back and he could take some touchdowns, but they had plenty of rushing touchdowns through Latavius Murray last season. I do feel like we're still going to see an improvement to the amount of receiving touchdowns that we see and hence passing touchdowns for Josh Allen. It's a really interesting one where, look, he could feasibly not be a top 5 quarterback without even having an injury, but it's really hard not to rank him there. I can't see a situation where you still don't rank him inside the top 5. Do you have Allen outside the top 5 in your rankings?
Yeah, no, yeah, I saw him in the top 5, but it's just like I
Yeah.
started thinking, like, everyone kind of regresses. Like, you can't always stay on top. And Mahomes was 8 last year, and I was like, why was Mahomes 8? And kind of dig deeper, it's that receiver. They haven't had Tyreek, they lost Juju, and then they had a bunch of rookies. Sky Moore wasn't the guy. Rice was kind of early on and only relied on Kelsey, and you can only rely on so many guys. And in fantasy, I feel like for quarterbacks, when you have that true number one receiver, it certainly helps. And if it's solid number 2, it helps your production. And it's just I looked at Allen like, everyone's just, thinks he's still the best. Like he should be. I mean, he's proven it though. But like you said, if he turns the ball over more, they don't sustain drives, could be in for, maybe not a top 2 season. Like he's still top 5, still great quarterback for fantasy, but outside that top 5 being drafted really high, I don't know. I think there is a pause for concern potentially.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like you can't rank him lower, but it should be enough to make you rethink taking him too early in drafts. If you're thinking about him in the second round, then you're thinking too early because there is that legitimate risk. And even if you're looking at him in the third round, maybe you're better off thinking maybe one of these other guys falls to me and there's more of a possibility there. So it certainly should be making you rethink when you take him, but not necessarily changing your ranking relative to other quarterbacks, I think. Now, speaking of other quarterbacks, my hottish level take, and I've been high on this guy all preseason. I love Kirk Cousins. I just feel like Kirk Cousins is going to be fantastic this season. He's been a top 13 quarterback for 8 consecutive seasons and was on track for another good finish until he got injured last year. And that was without having Justin Jefferson half the time. He now goes into a system which should mirror the Rams approach, and that Rams approach made Matthew Stafford the QB6 in 2021. When their quarterback is healthy, using this system, their quarterback will be really good for fantasy as a passing quarterback, especially if you're in 6-point passing touchdown leagues. I think that Kirk Cousins is a guy you just absolutely have to get late in drafts. He's got Kyle Pitts, he's got Drake London, he's got Bijan Robinson. Don't sleep on Ray McLeod and Darnell Mooney. They're very good for what they need him to do. It's a really good supporting cast. And the defense is still pretty average. They don't have a great defense, so they're going to need to chase points. For me, that means that Kirk Cousins is being ranked way too low. We know that he's an aggressive passer. We know that he's a good player. I know that there's kind of this perception that he gets overpaid and that he can't play in the playoffs. We don't need him to play in the playoffs. We need him to be good during the regular season, and that's when Kirk Cousins is good. We know that he very rarely misses time. Last season was very much an anomaly, and he seems like he's healthy now. I love this Falcons offense this season, and I think it's really hard to love Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Bijan. I mean, people have got Drake London as a top 12 wide receiver. How can you have that without having Kirk Cousins as a good quarterback as well? I just don't understand how that's possible. Jeff, what's your feeling on Kirk Cousins?
This is very hot, but I like the hot. I like the heat. And this is a take that when you said this earlier, I was like, huh. Because I do like you said, Drake London. And it's like, well, if you like a receiver that high, they got to be supported by the quarterback. And I like Kyle Pitts too as a tight end. I do like Bijan. He catches the ball. We've got a new offensive coordinator, a new offense. I think people maybe forget that Arthur Smith is gone from Atlanta and they're used to the old rushing Falcons. We're not going to see that. They're going to be slinging it around. And I like that. And he could be very, very sneaky. I've always enjoyed Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, and I don't see why he just can't continue that. He's very fortunate as a veteran quarterback to go from a really high level of skill position players in Minnesota and then turn around and go to Atlanta that has, okay, maybe they're not as good as Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson, though, but they're pretty damn good players. And Bijan's better at running back than he had in Minnesota. So it's like, 2 + 2 = 4. Why can't it repeat itself? And so a top 10 quarterback, I like that because the back end of the top 10 from like 8 to 12 to 13, and Kirk falls outside of that though. But when you look at those quarterbacks, it's really a toss up. Anything could go one way or the other, and I could easily see Kirk Cousins sneaking in that top 10 and surprising everybody.
Yep, absolutely. Totally with you. Like, I do think that this is going to surprise a lot of people. And I think it's especially those low end wide receivers as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Ray McLeod is like a top 40 wide receiver. It just feels like that sort of situation where they're going to have to pass the ball a lot, and Kirk's going to be heavily involved, and the other wide receivers are going to get dragged into the fray because it's just so different to what we've seen them do previously. Now, before we get into our super spicy take, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, before we get to that, we got some comments.
Yeah, we do. So a couple of things. Obviously, Jamie, always good to have you with us. And we talked about this. Jalen Wright, They not only gave up a 4th-round pick for him, they gave up a 2025 3rd-round pick. So that's another reason to be very nervous about what's going on with Devon Etienne and the idea that they're going to want to get Wright involved because they liked Wright enough to trade up from outside the draft to go and get him. Emma Man Wilson, asking for a friend. It's nice to have friends. Let's say you haven't done any research since fantasy football season ended last season. I mean, you've come to the right place if that's the case. What are 3 to 5 biggest stories to note which players jumped into the top 10 or into the top 20? I think we've already seen a couple. Obviously, you've got the rookies that are popping up there. You've got guys like Marvin Harrison, not Malik Harrison. He's a defender. And also Malik Neighbors. I've just mixed those two together into one player. And obviously, I really like Keon Coleman as well. But there's a couple of other big guys kind of jumping in because they've changed teams or because things have changed. What are some big things that you reckon people need to take note of before they go into their drafts?
Yeah, I think it's the running back carousel. I think that's going to have a huge impact into the season with Saquon going to Philly. I think a lot of us like him going there. I think many of us have him as a top 5 running back. I like him a lot in Philly. I wonder and worry about the rushing upside, kind of like with Derrick Henry. With the Ravens, I know with running quarterbacks, they kind of steal some of that goal line touchdowns every once in a while, and so does that decrease their TD equity? But looking at the running back, those 2 guys stick out to me. And then I think another one to me is really interesting is just the Rams offense in general. They had 2 guys come out of nowhere that nobody was talking about. Let's be real. If you were talking about Kyren Williams and Puka going to be finishing where they did last season, you weren't. But now, where do you draft them at now? That to me is a fascinating situation. People like Cooper Kupp more than Puka, but in drafts, Puka's going higher. And then with Kyren and this punt returning situation, is he still top 10? Is he outside people's top 10 now? So it's really fascinating. So I would tell them to do the research of some of those teams and players.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think a couple of the other big teams that we're seeing, the teams making really big changes that we probably don't expect to be really heavily fantasy relevant teams. Houston Texans making big moves, going and getting Stephon Diggs, going and getting Joe Mixon. Their offense could be really good, and all of those players are going to be involved. But working out which ones to pick is going to be an absolute nightmare. It's going to push Tank Dell down, for example, a lot more than you'd expect. Nico Collins could have been a real breakout player if they didn't bring Diggs in, so that's going to have a big impact. Joe Mixon could be underrated because he is their key number 1 running back. And then also the Chicago Bears. They go out and get Caleb Williams, and you think, well, they're probably going to struggle. They've got a rookie quarterback. But then they add to DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze, who's that sneaky, really good third top 10 wide receiver. So they're, for me, a couple of teams that I think probably need to be discussed when you're talking about fantasy teams that we wouldn't usually expect to be having big conversations about, that all of a sudden add a whole heap of assets to fantasy football. And on the Bears as well, I think Cole Kmet was the tight end 7 last season. He's now in a committee with Gerald Everett. It's been really clear from the preseason that Kmet's no longer the key number 1 guy. You can't use him in fantasy at all. I feel like this is going to be the kind of situation that we saw with Kyle Pitts last season, where all of a sudden you just can't use that guy because he's not out there enough because it's a true committee situation. So there's definitely a lot of changes going on. So it is important to have a look around at that stuff before getting into your drafts.
Yeah, on that note, off the cusp here real fast, there's these 3 teams, the Texans, the Packers, the Bears. They all have 3 receivers that are relevant. Why is it that the Packers are all going after a lot of the Bears and the Texans, and all the Texans are all going in the top 50? You got DJ Moore sprinkled in there, but Redunze and Allen, and then the Packers are on the very bottom. But I know CJ Stroud is higher ranked, but Jordan Love is higher than I think Caleb. But everyone likes the receivers more in Chicago than the Packers, which is really interesting, that dynamic, and people are drafting these receivers. Is there one receiver on each of those teams you like more?
Yeah, that is a really interesting one. And for me, the Chicago receivers are the ones I'm really concerned about because DJ Moore makes sense. He is their clear number 1. I don't understand why Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze are going so high. They're going to take snaps off each other. They're going to take touches off each other. And I do have at least 2 Packers ahead of all of them. I'm quite high on Jaden Reed because he was the wide receiver 7 down the stretch last year, and he only played 60% snaps. Now, potentially he continues to play 60% snaps, but the snaps he's playing are all the highest value passing downs, and he's the guy they go to in those situations. We also saw that when Christian Watson was healthy, and he's expected to be a lot more healthy, they've worked out his weird asymmetric hamstring situation, apparently. Assuming he's healthy, he could also be extremely productive. But the interesting thing is that neither of those guys are the every down wide receivers. Romeo Dobbs is going to be out there every down, and they're going to bring a lot of Dontavian Wicks out there. They're going to play a lot of 11 personnel, but it's going to be with Wicks taking over from Jaden Reed and taking over from Christian Watson. And I think that's what makes it really messy. It is more of a 4 wide receiver situation, and I think it's one to watch. I know a lot of people have been taking Wicks late in draft and getting really excited about it. Realistically, there's one way that Wicks is productive, and that's if you get a Christian Watson or Romeo Dobbs injury. That's really the only situation where all of a sudden Wicks is going to become that league winner you're hoping for. And it's unlikely he becomes a true league winner because how high you drafting Christian Watson already? He's just going to do what Christian Watson did. So go and get Christian Watson. You can get him a couple of rounds earlier. I don't understand the Wicks love there. That doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, the whole situation in all of those wide receiver rooms is really interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just curious of that with that question that was asked.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. Now, let's get into some super spicy takes. And this one, when you said it, I thought, that's pretty darn spicy. And then I thought about it. I thought, I think he has a point. Talk to us about Travis Etienne.
Yes. So this is my spiciest of the Tabasco you can get. This is the ghost pepper. I have Travis Etienne finishing as RB1 this season. He was a workhorse last season in Jacksonville, and he has the trust of his quarterback we played in college with and his head coach. So you like to see that in the preseason and in last season. He gets the goal line work and third down work as a pass catcher as well. So hitting all the check marks. Last season, he was RB3 in PPR points scored total. Okay. We got some history here. He was third last year in touches with 325, averaging 19, almost 20 a game, which was 7th amongst all running backs. Okay, gets a lot of work, as we mentioned, and there's the stats to prove it. He's played 17 games back-to-back seasons, even though he had this injury concern in his rookie year and the last year. He's played 17 games in back-to-back seasons. Looking back at his season last year as this RB3, he was 1 of 7 running back with double-digit touchdowns, 1 of 7 with 58 receptions, 1 of 3 running back with over 270 carries. And this is the one that shocked me the most, but he was only 1 of 2 running backs, like you to guess this running back in a second, but to rush for over 1,000 yards, double-digit scores rushing, and 50-plus receptions last season. Who do you think the other running back was?
I mean, you'd hope it was Christian McCaffrey. Did he go over 1,000?
That was him, yeah. And he was RB1. So, and when San Francisco, I worry about, is it Trent Williams, who isn't reporting to camp, so hasn't signed. CMC's numbers are really effective when he's off the field. So that's kind of in the Etienne's favor. And I was digging into some deeper numbers here. Hear me out. Since 2015, the average RB1 was age 25 years old. Do you know how old Travis Etienne is?
Well, he's got to be 25 years old.
He's 25 years old. You're so smart.
Love it.
You're so smart. And since 15, over 50% of running backs who are RB1s were drafted in the first or second round. Do you know what round Etienne was drafted by the Jags?
It was like 25th pick overall or something like that.
Mm-hmm, yeah, first rounder. So, all right, another check mark. Additionally, over the last 9 years, looking at this here, a RB1 that finishes RB1 needs a minimum 250 carries, 50-plus receptions, and double-digit scores. He did that last year, and I just feel like he fits that bill. In his third season, he can handle the workload. I know they're talking about Tank Bigsby, but I think if anything, that only helps his efficiency and doesn't take away his actual stats. Keeps him fresh for the longevity of the season. They brought in, big play wide receivers, Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas, to score touchdowns on the outside, bringing those safeties back, which is going to allow better room to operate, less stacked boxes for Etienne, and he's just going to get a lot of work. So there is a real possibility that he does finish as RB1 and he's going as like RB7 or RB8 in draft. So don't overlook Travis Etienne this year.
I'm very on board with this take. when looking into it, I thought, well, how good was he actually last season? Like, how good was his metrics? How good was his play? And the answer is really, really, really good. Like, we forget that he's such a talented running back because there's so many other good players. Their O-line wasn't great last week.
Yeah.
Last season. Really limited his efficiency, but they want to run the ball a lot because they know they can't really trust Trevor Lawrence to pass at the amount that they'd like to. And for that reason, their running game is a really big part of what they do. I only do my like rankings of like the previous season up to week 17 because I don't trust week 18. And if you take out week 18, Etienne was the RB2 last season in PPR. He goes ahead of Breece Hall because Breece Hall had a massive week 18. Now, to be fair, we know Breece Hall was injured early in the season. We know Bijan's back and he's got a better situation, let's put it that way, and should be significantly better. We know that Jonathan Taylor should be healthy this season. So there are 3 backs that were in weird situations that now come in and they're not. But there's no doubt that Etienne's going to get all of the same stuff he got last season. At the start of last season, there was a lot of discussion of we've brought in Tank Bigsby as a 3rd-round pick because we want to take some of the load off Travis Etienne. We're going to use Dearness Johnson to take some load off Travis Etienne. And Travis Etienne saying, well, that's good. I want to stay healthy. I want to take the load off myself, despite the fact he was like an every down back at Clemson for quite a lot of his time there and was really excellent doing it. The same thing's happening this preseason. They keep saying, oh, we're going to use a lot more Tank Bigsby. Tank Bigsby is, a guy we're going to use a lot in the offense. I don't think that's going to change anything. I think realistically, they're trying to win games. Travis Etienne is so much better than everyone else they have. They just need to keep giving him the ball. He is their best weapon. They don't have a true number 1 receiver. Travis Etienne is their star, and they've got a whole lot of supplementary pieces. So I think Etienne, I think it's entirely reasonable to think he finishes as a top 5 running back this season. I've at times thought about ranking him ahead of Saquon Barkley. He's currently my running back 6. I've got him ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs. I've got him ahead of a lot of those other guys that you would expect to have higher than him because I do think that Etienne has a real chance of maybe not being the running back 1 without some luck, but certainly being a very high running back. And plus, if Christian McCaffrey goes down, all of a sudden that number 1 position really does become accessible. So I love this take. I'm totally on board with it. It's Travis Etienne season, basically, I think.
Let's do it. Yeah, I'm a Jags fan too, so don't call me a homer, but I think this year it's actually possible.
You're a homer. No, you're right. I agree that it's possible, and I think anyone who's a Jags fan understands that this is actually more realistic than most people give it credit for. Because we talk about guys like Evan Ingram a lot, and we love talking about how Trevor Lawrence is really good, but he's not great for fantasy. He's just a pretty talented quarterback. I think Etienne's the real fantasy weapon there in Jacksonville. Now, my spicy take. Well, this is a little bit different. I've also gone running backs, but I've gone really super spicy. I've gone, this is not going to happen, but maybe it could. My spicy take, Rico Dowdle as a top 5 running back. And you're like, that is absolutely insane. There is no way that's going to happen. He's not even the starting running back. Well, just hold up a second. In 2022, Ezekiel Elliott was joined by this random 5th rounder called Tony Pollard in the Cowboys backfield. And Zeke had finished as the running back 6 in 2021. And he looks primed for another big year. But it wasn't Zeke that had a big year in 2022. It was Pollard. In their committee, Pollard finished as the running back 7, despite only getting 232 total touches. And it's not like Tony Pollard is extraordinarily talented because look at what he did the next year in 2023. He looked pretty average. They just managed to make him really explosive and give him the high-value touches, and that made him really good for fantasy. Now, Zeke's now 2 years older, and while he is a great pass blocker, and I'm sure they'll use him there, realistically, he lacks the explosiveness that made him so good earlier in his career. He's going to be really good at those grinding downs on, 2nd and shorts and things like that. I'll use him on 1st down quite a lot. But why wouldn't we want the Pollard equivalent? And that's Rico Dowdle. The Cowboys brass has made it really clear that Dowdle will be less involved on special teams. And that means they're compensating for an increased role in the offense. He barely played in the preseason. His position is really obviously clear. All it would take is a Zeke injury, and all of a sudden Rico Dowdle is a league winner. They've released Royce Freeman, who was his main threat for a lot of that heavy down work. They've still got Juice Vaughn there, but He's very much a special teams guy, and he's small. At worst, he's going to take some receiving work, but Dowdle's a perfectly capable receiver. Malik Davis is the only other guy there, and we're very clear that Dowdle is a better player than Malik Davis. So, look, I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen. This would require the Cowboys' O-line to be the old Cowboys' O-line. I don't think that's the case. But if you look at the Cowboys' offense, they don't have a lot of weapons. They've got CeeDee Lamb, who is excellent. They've got Jake Ferguson, who is functional. They've got Brandon Cooks, who's good. They've got Dak Prescott, who I think is actually a really good quarterback that doesn't get the credit he deserves because everyone hates the Cowboys. I don't get that because I'm not American, so I don't have an innate hate for the Cowboys. I just see them as a solid team who struggles in the playoffs, and Dak is a good quarterback who can be really good for fantasy. But they need the run game to be good for Dak to function like that. And I think if it's going to be good, it's got to be Rico Dowdle because it's not going to be Ezekiel Elliott. Where do you think I am sitting with Rico Dowdle? Am I entirely insane? Is there something in this? What do you reckon?
This is spicier than my take because I don't know if anyone thinks Rico could do it, but I think he showed flashes last year as the Cowboys back that he does have some potential there. Zeke, looking at preseason and camp, I think you're just a publicity stunt bringing him back because they didn't draft a running back. And all the old Cowboys fans can bring out their old Zeke jerseys and say, "Hey, I have a Zeke jersey still," because Jerry loves doing those things. So, but honestly, Rico is the most talented back. They did bring in Dalvin Cook out of nowhere. Now, looking at depth charts, he's actually like third or fourth, even though they just brought him in. So he has to work his way into that role. But I think Rico is the best back in this backfield. And CD's back. So that means Dak will be fine. We all like Jake Ferguson as a solid tight end. So I think there's room for Rico to operate. Pollard still actually was coming back from a serious injury with that fracture. He was still, I believe, a top 8 or top 10 running back. So I don't see why Rico can't potentially repeat that if he's given that workload and is the better pass catching back than Zeke. So there is a possibility that this actually happens. But it is extra spicy. He's not being drafted anywhere near that. So this is a super value if you just take a dart throw and see if he's Kyren Williams. Why not?
Yeah, totally agree. And like I said, I don't think that this exact thing is going to happen, but this is kind of representative of this idea that Rico Dowdle has a lot of upside, especially relative to most of the other running backs you're taking in that range. A lot of people want to take a Jerome Ford, and that makes sense. He's going to be good in the season. You want to take a Chuba Hubbard. He's going to be good early in the season. But realistically, you don't win your league early in the season. The really only good reason to take someone like a Ford or a Hubbard is because your running backs are truly awful. And you need to make up for those running backs being truly awful by having a guy who's going to be functional early in the season. Rico Dowdle's going to be great late in the season. That's the kind of player that I want. I want to start with a really solid team and then fill my bench with upside players who are going to help me down the stretch. I feel like Dowdle could emerge into a really strong role later in the season. You can get him really cheap. You can get him in the double-digit rounds. I got him in a rookie draft in the 4th round earlier in the preseason. No one is talking about this guy. So this is someone you can take late on in drafts. I love his upside. I love his floor as well because he is clearly involved in this offense. If I've gone 0 RB or hero RB, he's the kind of guy I want as my running back too, because I feel like he's not only going to be good for a couple of weeks, he's going to be good for the long term, and I feel like that's exactly what we need.
I couldn't agree more.
Now let's take the remaining questions we've got. Jamie, totally agree with you, mate. When there's wide receiver vacated targets on a team, usually the running back benefits. And that's really going to help Etienne here. And I think that's also a reason that a lot of people have been higher on James Cook this season as well. Realistically, James Cook goes into a situation where he didn't get a lot of touches last season, but Stephon Diggs isn't there. So there is reason to believe those targets will go to, not necessarily the targets, but the touches will go to Cook. I'm not sure that I totally buy that, but this idea of thinking about what's happening with the wide receiver vacated targets, I think has a lot of value in what we're doing. And Casey wants to dig in a little bit more about Dalvin Cook. I mean, did you watch Dalvin Cook last season? I guess that's the question, because he didn't look very good. Realistically, they brought him in as kind of like a bridge running back, which is, I know, is a situation we tend to use more for quarterbacks, but really that's what they did. They brought him in for a couple of weeks, when they expected Breece Hall wasn't going to be very healthy. And Breece Hall proved to be significantly more explosive early on in the season than we expected. And then Cook was done after 4 or 5 weeks. Realistically, he was inactive for half the season. And it's not like teams were lining up to sign him. He's a depth option. He's really experienced. He's a solid blocking running back, but they've already got Zeke for that. For me, Dalvin Cook is replacing Royce Freeman, I think. I think realistically, Dalvin Cook adds that veteran experience. If something happens to Zeke, Dalvin Cook comes in and he's going to be really useful on those passing downs where they need someone who they can rely on to get the to get the pickups right and things like that, so that they can keep Dak healthy. Plus, I think for Dalvin Cook, he just wants to go to a team that's going to challenge in the playoffs. He wants an opportunity to get a ring, and that makes perfect sense. But I think he's past the point where he's going to be getting heavy touches.
Yeah, I don't think there's any fantasy relevance with Dalvin Cook, unfortunately. I think those times are past us. And like you said, he's just a depth piece for the Cowboys. And nobody was out to get him, like you said, in the offseason. And I even told my buddies, being from Texas, I was like, I'm just waiting for a surprise running back to get cut, and the Cowboys are going to snatch him up. I didn't think it would be this signing. I thought maybe Pirine would be, one of those guys that was on the cutting block. But they chose Dalvin Cook. So I just don't see any relevance there for fantasy unless Zeke really does go out. He's just truly a depth piece, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's not active some games, actually.
Yep, I totally agree. I think he's going to be inactive more games than he's going to be active potentially during the season. In fact, when I heard about the Dalvin Cook signing, I was actually really excited for Rico Dowdle because of all the people they could have signed, they chose to sign Dalvin Cook. And that says really good things because there were significantly better players out there. In fact, I wanted to bring up Samaje Perine briefly, who you just mentioned. Him going to the Chiefs, that actually makes me a little bit scared for Isaiah Pacheco, because the thing I really liked about Pacheco was the fact that he is going to get the receiving work. They don't have Jerick McKinnon coming back. Jerick McKinnon's used a lot around the goal line because they like to pass the ball. They like to get the ball in Mahomes' hands and pass it on the goal line. They didn't bring McKinnon back. I thought, well, this is great. Pacheco's going into that passing down role. That's really valuable for fantasy. He's going to be in there on the goal line a lot. This is fantastic news. And then they brought in Samaje Perine. And you just have to feel like there's that risk that Perine comes in and takes that McKinnon role. And all of a sudden, Pacheco's upside really gets lowered. He goes back to being just a rushing running back. And that's not great for fantasy.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I was talking with one of my friends, too, about this actually today. And it's like, man, I was really high on Pacheco. I wanted to have him on this list as being my RB1. And then I saw that news drop. And I was like, well, crap, because no one really realizes that Samaje Perine, he caught 50 balls last season. People don't realize that. He's a true pass-catching back now, and he fills a void that McKinnon did. So maybe Pacheco doesn't really get as many of those third downs as we thought he was going to in the season. Maybe early on in the year he does, but midway in the year, Perine comes in and does play a handful of drives. And I just think that overall hurts his value. I still love his value, though. I think he'll still be a top 10 back, but I think if you're looking for a top 5 running back upside, I think he may have lost it. So still like him, but I don't think he's a top 5 now, as like a dark horse top 5 now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it really saps his upside, I think, is the biggest fear there. And especially, I suspect on those 2-minute drives, that's where we're going to see a lot of Perine as well, because that's where we saw a lot of him in Denver. And that's where we used to see a lot of Jerick McKinnon as well. So I feel like there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about that. We've got a couple of other questions, including this one. Are you answering questions? Yes. Yes, we are answering questions. Laporta over Kelsey in the rankings. Are we dethroning the king? Never. We will never. Look, as a Kelsey, Travis Kelsey's legitimately my favorite player, not just for fantasy, but in the NFL. And he has been, because he was the first tight end I ever drafted way back when, in like his rookie season when I got into fantasy. I didn't know anything about what I was talking about, but I just ended up with him, and I've loved him ever since. And I'm also a Taylor Swift fan from like 2006. So I will never give up on Travis Kelsey. Travis Kelsey is my guy. I've got him ranked number 1 over Sam Laporta. And that's not just a homer pick. It is because I think that Kelsey offers more consistency. I do think he is still the clear number 1 guy there. I'm a little bit nervous about Sam Laporta repeating. I do think Sam Laporta is really talented. I'm a big fan of Laporta. He was very high in my rookie rankings coming out. I ranked him as a top 12 tight end going into last season when no one else was. That really helped me in the accuracy rankings, actually. But I'm concerned about what's happening with Jameson Williams. Nervous about them using Jahmyr Gibbs a lot more in the passing game. If that happens, that's going to hurt Laporta because they're going to be operating in the same area of the field. I think Tim Patrick could sneakily be more involved than you expect. So while I've got Laporta as my tight end too, I do have him close to Kelsey. I don't feel great about either of them, honestly. I just feel like tight end such a strong position that you don't need to take them high anymore. There's probably 11 good tight ends that I'd be happy having on my team. And so I'm probably not going to have a lot of Laporta or Kelsey, but if I had to pick one, I'm picking Kelsey. Where do you sit on Laporta versus Kelsey?
Yeah, ride the Kelsey train till it falls off, like Rob and Tom back at the Patriots. Just keep riding Mahomes and Kelsey until it's not there anymore. This may be the last run. This may be the last time, like what talking about Kelsey like this, but I still think he still offers a little bit more upside. He's a go-to. He's got Mahomes' trust. Third down, where is Mahomes going? In the red zone, where is he looking? Kelsey, let's be real. So you want that in fantasy for one more season at least. And Laporta will push for that. Maybe not this year, in a couple years. I also like Trey McBride a lot. I know there's a little bit of up and down on him, but I kind of like him with Kyler Murray. They already established a little bit of a chemistry. So another tight end to look for. Not that high, though. But as Jamie said here, he has Laporta at 5. Yeah, there's a lot of tight ends. This is like one of the few years where there is, like you said, around 8 to 9 really legitimate tight ends that I'd be okay with in a draft. And I don't know if I want to spend a 3rd or 4th round pick on a tight end this year.
Yeah, I agree. If you look at where Laporta and Kelsey are going, and you're usually having to take them in the 2nd or 3rd round of drafts, there's so many better players available in other positions that are going to give you more of a differentiating factor. If you go and look through history, the top 2 tight ends usually make a massive difference to your team. That's not the case anymore because you can still get a Mark Andrews. You can still get a Trey McBride, especially in PPR, although I am lower on him than most people are. You can get a Kyle Pitts who should bounce back this season. You can get a Dalton Kincaid who should step up. You can get David Njoku or Evan Ingram, who should be solid options. Brock Bowers could be good. Jake Ferguson is available. And there's a whole heap of other deep options. I've missed someone. George Kittle. George Kittle should be good as
OG.
well. There's so many good tight ends available. You just don't need to reach for one of those top guys anymore, but somebody will. Because most of the overall rankings that you'll find on the internet are based on the points from previous seasons. And in previous seasons, Kelsey was so much higher that it's expected that the top tight end is going to finish a lot ahead. And that's just not going to be the case this season. And that means that other people who are just going off a sheet of rankings are going to take them too early. So if you don't end up with Kelsey or Laporta, you've probably done the right thing.
Well, I agree. Get the value, not the rank. Get the value.
Exactly. The value is where it's at. Now, the big question, who would you each pick first overall? Is it Travis Etienne?
Yeah, why not? But no, this is a tough one. Like everyone has to go CMC after what he's done with San Fran now consistently 2 years. The worry is Trent Williams. Like, is he going to really be playing or not? That's tough. I actually like Breece Hall a lot as well, surprisingly. I think I hear rumors of like the Jets, I guess like in the locker room isn't like the best right now. It's with Aaron Rodgers there. I love A-Rod, but there's a lot of veterans there. They traded for Hassan Riddick, who hasn't showed up yet. Like, what are you doing with that situation? That's going to ruffle feathers in that locker room. But I do like Breece Hall. His overall talent could put him as an RB1. I mean, he's RB2 in many rankings, so it wouldn't be a stretch to say he's RB1. I love CeeDee Lamb. He's really the only option to have in Dallas. But the last receiver to repeat was AB, Antonio Brown. So that's been a while. So he's got an outside chance of doing that. I think Tyreek has got a chance to being in that consideration, though, but is he still the cheetah? Is he a little slower? Like, I don't know. He's still fast, right? But does Jalen Waddle to make that step to being a legitimate true number 2, borderline receiver 1 now? So there's a lot of question marks. So
we may have lost Jeff, or we've lost me.
Answer your question, Casey. I don't have an answer for.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. But yeah, reluctantly, I would choose CMC.
Yeah. Look, This is a tough one because not every league is the same, and your league settings make a really big difference on what's going on. I think your scoring settings is going to make a difference. Is it PPR or half PPR? I think your roster configuration makes a difference. Do you have 3 wide receivers? How many flex spots do you have? Realistically, in PPR, most flex spots are going to be used by wide receivers, and that increases the value of wide receivers. All of a sudden, you're starting 40 wide receivers across the league instead of 30 wide receivers, for example. That all of those things make a big difference. And for that reason, there's no real one hard and fast answer, except it's always CMC for me. And I know that sounds weird, but I do personalized rankings, and you can email me at benworsley23@gmail.com if you need personalized rankings for your draft this weekend. I think I've done 25 sets of personalized rankings so far this season, and there were a whole heap of different roster settings. There's people with weird scoring settings. They're getting points for rushes, extra points for receptions, points for completions. In every single set of rankings I set out, after putting it through my model, which analyzes which players are most likely to have the most value, I always had CMC number 1 in all 25. And that's 25 different leagues. Every league is a little bit different, and yet they all ended up with CMC as number 1. I just feel very confident about everything that's happening there. The only risk with CMC is an injury, because it's not workload, because you know you're going to use him. It's not the offense, because we know it's going to be good. He just needs to stay healthy. And coming into the season with a calf injury is not ideal. But with your first pick, I don't think it's the time to get cute. Okay, you can get a little bit aggressive, like 4th, 5th, 6th round and onwards, trying to reach for players and going for guys that you particularly like. For me personally, CMC is just so clearly the number 1 guy. There's only really 3 running backs that I particularly like. It's CMC, Breece Hall, and Bijan Robinson, and I'm happy to go out of my way to get them because there's a whole lot more wide receivers that I like. There's a heap of like running back 2 style guys that I like, but CMC just stands head and shoulders above everybody else. I like CeeDee Lamb, but there's a lot of question marks there. I've seen Tyreek Hill go number 1 in a couple of my leagues. I even saw a league where the top non-quarterback, it was a super flex league, top non-quarterback off the board was Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then the second non-quarterback was AJ Brown. So there's a lot of people trying to get a little bit too cute and trying to look for projection, trying to find reasons not to draft people. CMC is the number 1 player in football. He has been a lot of different times. This is not like this is a one-off situation. He's been good for years. Realistically, if he's healthy, he will be the number 1 in football. And if he's not the number 1, he's going to be pretty darn close. And you can't say that about anybody else. Everyone else has enough knocks to suggest that if something goes wrong, they won't be the number 1 guy anymore. If Brock Purdy goes down, CMC's still the number 1 guy. If there's no Trent Williams, CMC's still the number 1 guy. If there's no Ayuk or Debo or George Kittle, it's still CMC. Whereas with Breece Hall, as soon as Aaron Rodgers went down, he looked a little bit iffy. With Tyreek Hill, if you lose Tua, Tyreek Hill's not going to be useful to you. If you lose Dak, CeeDee Lamb's not going to be useful. We saw what happened to Justin Jefferson when he lost Kirk Cousins. CMC doesn't need any of that. He is the number 1 player in fantasy football.
I'm sold.
Sermon over. And just to cap that off, Jamie's come in and said he would take a lot of players over CMC. Sorry, Jamie. I don't agree.
Good luck, Jamie.
I don't agree, but I respect your opinion, and that's what matters. Cool. I think we have. I think we're out of questions, which is great. Thank you to everyone for getting involved. Thank you for asking your questions. We love answering your questions on here. Look, I'll be back every week at this time. We're doing slot versus wide stuff as we get into the season. So we're going to do slots versus wide stuff in week 1 as well. That's where we analyze where players line up and which teams are stronger against certain alignments, seeing if we can take advantage of that and give you some good starts during the season. Jeff, what do you got coming up as we enter the actual season?
Yeah, continually looking at the running back rankings, updating those on a weekly basis with injuries and trends, and then also utilizing one of our free tools. So check out all our tools on razzball.com. They're all free for you, so take full advantage of them. But it's the touchdown, rushing, share, and model, which shows you percentages of shares of running backs, percentages of rush carries and targets for receivers, as well as their projections for touchdowns and their actual touchdowns, and trying to figure out what's actually an anomaly, what's realistic, what to expect moving forward. So I'll be looking at those as we move forward throughout the season as well.
Love it. And look, if you've heard Jeff talk, you know he's really good at getting into the numbers and doing that analysis. You've got to check out his articles. Check out all of our articles. There's lots of good articles on Razzball, bringing out a heap at the moment. I think we had 16 articles come out in the last week or so, mostly very deep in analysis and looking at the best players to help you in your leagues. The same thing's going to happen this week, but we're looking at week one and trying to get those starts right. I'll have my streamers and stashes article coming out in the coming days to try to help you work out which players to slide in if you're struggling with injuries. And there will be some players that miss week one due to injuries, so working that out. And also picking those correct kickers and DSTs. If you're not streaming kickers and DSTs, you're not playing fantasy football right? So you definitely need to be checking that out each week. Of course, I'll also have that slot versus wide analysis article and also the podcast as well. Plus, you can always go check out my long form stuff. I say long form stuff. I've been talking for nearly an hour here, but I do go into my long form stuff on my other channel, which is the Fantasy First Down. So feel free to go check that out as well. And make sure you head over to the football.razzball.com website. So many great tools. And I'm not talking about the writers. I'm talking about the things we use to analyze things. So much stuff going on. So please make sure you check that stuff out. Anything bold to end us with, Jeff?
Going bold for week one. We'll say Etienne is running back 1 against Miami.
You heard it here first. And if it happens, you have to like and subscribe. I feel like you should anyway. Just like and subscribe on the channel because you're going to want to see what's coming up in the next few weeks. Bobby, hope you get better soon. Looking forward to having you back next week. We are out of here.